Tonight we're going to look at the after-treatment controller. It was a module designed to be mounted in the back of the unit up where the after-treatment is. It was not necessary with the 871 where you just had a diesel particulate filter. It was necessary when they added the SCR system because they added a bunch of additional sensors, and at the time the engine's ECM was not powerful enough to handle that. So they basically added an external controller. The engine's ECM and the after-treatment controller talk to each other on a 1939 data bus. That's J1939 data bus. The controller itself has all the inputs to the rear knock sensor, the DEF pump, there's a water valve in back in the frame that allows hot water to go into the DEF tank when it's cold outside. We didn't talk about that when we mentioned all the parts on the 2250. That valve is an OEM part, it's not a Cummins part, but the after-treatment controller controls it to control temperature in the DEF tank. That controller also controls the heated DEF lines and the DEF pump and the DEF injector, and the rear knock sensor, the outlet knock sensor, and those temperature sensors. It monitors all that and sends that information up to the engine's ECM, and then they communicate back and forth, and then the controller issues commands from there. It does have firmware in it. We're going to talk about that because that's important to make sure you've got the most current revision in it. And it does have fault codes that the ECM will use to point to that controller or circuits that it takes care of. So let's take a quick look at it, and then we'll be going on to our next video from there. This is what the controller looks like. There's two plugs that bolt onto it, a shorter one and then a long one. You'll see the pins in a second. It's got 5 holes that you mount with it. That rubber plug up on top of it there, you leave that alone. Do not pull it out. That's how it breathes. And it's a pretty hardy unit. Really, the only time I've seen these have problems is if salt gets inside and corrodes the pins. Other than that, they're pretty trouble-free. Again, it's just important that they have the correct firmware in it, and we're going to look at that last in a second here. So let's move on now to another view, and here's a view of the pins. Don't mind the chain around it, that just propped it up. There's quite a few pins in there. You do not want to use any test leads in the testing of the harness unless they are the right part number lead, because some of the smaller ones are very easy to spread the sockets on, and then you'll have nothing but problems. The bigger leads in there are your main power and ground supplies and some of the driving pins for the devices that use a lot of current. Okay, let's take a look at the firmware. This is a snapshot in Insight. The screen you're looking at is the calibration screen found in Cummins Insight software. And we've got the calibration choices expanded, and we've gone down to programmable data link device because the after-treatment controller is a programmable device that is found on the data link remotely away from the engine. So you see we've got after-treatment diesel exhaust fluid controller, and then the only part number that they make of this is the part number shown there, that 2880-480. And it might be a different number now in the Cummins book, but that's the part number that you'll use to control it, to calibrate it, I should say. And then over on the right, once you highlight that controller, there is all your choices. And as you can see, it goes all the way from 3.75 to 3.7.8.3. If your controller fails, you have to replace it. It'll probably have the 3.7.8 in it, and you'll want to get it updated to the 3.7.8.3. And the ECM code that will be downloaded is 4353196, and that's the the proper code with the right software version in it. And the reason you want to update that is because they had trouble with the DEF fluid freezing in very, very cold weather. There's a close-up of the calibration stuff for you. The DEF fluid would freeze in very cold weather. I think it freezes around 22 degrees. So if you got down to zero, it'd be like a block of ice. And if there was any DEF fluid in that pump or the lines, it would freeze. And so we would have a unit come in with the DEF pump not working, all kinds of fault codes, pull the plug off of it, and DEF fluid would run out. And the DEF fluid looks like water when it comes out of there. But if you look at the pins, they were always green because it's very corrosive. And what this firmware does is when you shut the key off, you'll hear that DEF pump run. This made that pump run in about an extra minute and a half to make sure it had time to pull all the fluid back out of that pump and the lines and get it all back into the DEF tank. And that's why your DEF tank is that phenolic plastic, if you will, so that if it's got DEF in it, even if it's full, if it freezes, there's room for the ice to expand, the tank can move, and it doesn't crack. So they thought through this pretty well. Let's move on next to the DEF pump, since we brought that up in this.